Well, welcome everyone. Hello. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon to hear from Montreal artist Ingrid Bachmann, who has kindly agreed to join us while she's installing an exhibition at the on-site gallery downtown. My name is Michael Longford. I think all of you know me, but I also want to welcome our guests who are here from York and from outside of York, which is great. So welcome. Okay. Are we still getting some feedback? Okay. Sorry, we're just going to have a little tech issue here. I think you just have to turn down your sound, Hersa Volante. There we go. That's great. All right. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. So we are grateful and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located. The area known as Tekaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. And we acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and this territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region, for which we are very grateful. In addition, the Department of Computational Arts and AMPD would also like to acknowledge that virtual networks on which our activities and gatherings are sited is a product of the Silicon Valley and Zoom headquarters, which are located on the Muwekma and Ohlone territories. Great. So with that, what I'd like to do is introduce Ingrid. I had the pleasure of meeting Ingrid. We've learned today that we were both alumni, or at least both of us have spent time here at York University many, many years ago. Ingrid and I also had the pleasure of teaching at Concordia University a number of years ago now as well. So Ingrid Bachmann is a multidisciplinary artist, primarily working in kinetic and interactive media. Her work has been exhibited internationally at the Havana Biennial, Manifestation d'Art International 6, in festivals and exhibitions in Belgium, the US, Estonia, Singapore, Peru, Brazil, the UK, and Cuba. Bachmann is a founding member of Hexagram, the Institute for Research and Creation in Media Arts, and a founding director of the Institute for Everyday Life. She's also co-editor of Material Matters and a contributor to numerous anthologies on contemporary art and technology. And she's currently Professor Emerita at Concordia University in Montreal. So I feel privileged to have you here with us today. And with that, I'm going to turn my screen over to yours.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. It's lovely to be here.
Oh, just give us 1 minute, Ingrid. Yeah, we just...
There we go. Okay. So it gives me great pleasure to be here among you and among so many old friends as well. So it's quite a treat to be here, and I'm no longer as young as I think I am. So I'm going to take you along a bit of a journey with some of my very early experiences with technology and to some of my newest ones. And it's not only technology, it's also been textiles, technology, kind of materials. And as many as you know, the base of the computer has often been considered the Jacquard loom, the computer loom, and Babbage's difference engine. My first memorable experience with technology came at a country fair in southwestern Ontario, where I was raised. At that time, it was a common pastime for families on Sundays to go for a drive in the country. My family didn't go, but my best friends did. Occasionally on these Sundays, one could find traveling country fairs, and some of these fairs included traveling preachers and religious revival tents. Among the cotton candy and pony rides. At a particularly memorable fair, there was a at one particular one of the preachers gave out a DIY record player, a very flimsy vinyl disc. The player was made from cardboard. The record needle was a pin, and a pencil was used for the motion. You put the pin into the first groove of the record, you use the pencil to turn the record around, and apparently you could hear the word of God. Now, I grew up in a secular house, so this was especially fascinating for me. Well, I never did hear the word of God, but it did instill in me a lifelong fascination with technology, and particularly with DIY technology or kind of provisional technology. The kind of technology of magic employed by amusement parks, traveling circuses, and nomadic evangelical preachers. There we go. Now, this is an engraving of a common household flea, one of my favorite images by one of my favorite natural scientists, Robert Hooke, the 18th century scientific experimenter and innovator. He was a polymath, and he made, significant contributions in physics, astronomy, biology, medicine, and in architecture. And in 1664, he published his book, Micrographia, which he had made. It was this book of observations made using the compound microscope, which he had invented. What was interesting at that time, anyone who made an invention usually drew or had illustrations made to show this was pre-photography. But Hooke did his own illustrations, and they have a copy of the Micrographia at the McGill Rare Books and Special Collections. And it's huge. It folds out, and it's this beautiful image. But what really, I think, interested me most, that he has this like state-of-the-art new technology, and what he wants to look at is a flea. And so in that book, there are things like the pin of a needle, like the most mundane things. And so that kind of interesting, that kind of observation, curiosity, and also that interest in new technologies, but also in the everyday world and the world around us. So, and that I do feel that a real kinship with him about that. So in the past, my collaborators have included people, buildings, my hermit crab, and seismic plates. So I've always been interested in sort of exploring alternative ways of making art, and that's led me to some really interesting collaborations. So I'm going to talk about work. In 1992, I was at the Banff Center, and this was just a time when the internet was becoming more public. 1992 was 1 year before Mosaic, the very first web browser, came out. It came from the University of Urbana supercomputing. So access to the internet was still very, very limited. So it's hard to imagine a time when there aren't browsers like Chrome or and so again, that was really interesting. So I thought, okay, I want to work with this new technology. And so I set up a project called A Nomad Web Sleeping Beauty Awakes. And it was, at that point, it was sort of a site. At that point, the internet was primarily text-based. And if you wanted to send an image, it might take an hour and a half, and it would crash. And so I worked with a program. For him, it was quite simple to provide access to the internet. And then wanted to tell a place for people to tell stories. So we had a number of host sites. And interestingly enough, they were all sites where it was predominantly women. And so I think that's always been my real interest, is to kind of look at the genderizing, is that a word? Of technology, and to kind of really change that. So I don't think that is a word. So there was one at Concordia University in the textiles department was one site, Goldsmiths College in London, and at a college in San Francisco. And so it was, an early network project. Now that looks it seems so banal, but it was a really exciting way to kind of look at this new place to explore ideas. And also it was very important for me to introduce young women to the internet. And so the students in the Fibers area at Concordia were among the first to have email access well, the engineers were first. So, and so what it was also a way to, so it's a bit odd, isn't it? It's very text-based. So there were these two, you can see little Mac Classics where you could access the internet. Then there was a lot of information on how to access it. And then there was also the record of, uh, all the discussions and documents. I then, as I've liked to do, whatever I've done digitally, I tend to like to do material. So again, while I was at the Banff Center, they started to experiment with virtual reality. This was in the early 1990s too, and at this time it was this massive head helmet. Like you put it on, it smelled. It was like, oh, and so, but it was so interesting. But I was so interested in the promise of it. It was going to recreate the whole human sensorium. It was going to be immersive, interactive, and I thought, okay, I want to do this in a material way. So I decided to turn a gallery into a giant chalkboard. So every surface was painted with chalkboard paint, and in that space were things that were silk screened on, things that were drawn on. On the back, there's a head of figures of authority from Western history. You could pull the red mouse. There were ladders, there were giant pieces of chalk. This image is from one of its version in New York at the end. And I learned an incredible amount from about interactivity from this work. The pillars were also on wheels, and they had sort of the foundational myths of Greek mythology, logos, timos, demos. And really, a lot of computer programming is sort of based on Greek logic. If this, then this, instead of therefore, it's end if. So it was so interesting for me to observe. I showed this in many different places, and in every place it became a bit of a signpost for something that had happened recently. But it also became wherever the chalkboard was, people tended to write more authoritarian, like things about rules. People drew on it. People did. Uh, it also was a very physical piece because there were these. I don't think I have a photo of them, but there were these very giant chalks that I'd cast, and so that was really important to try to explore that. And I think when I did work with digital media, those things, I don't really distinguish between media. I mean, obviously they have different histories, they have different, but my approach to them is kind of similar. After that, I was living in Chicago, and it was during the first Gulf War, which now feels, and that was sort of considered the first televised war, where there was this real distance between, you weren't sending as many troops into battle. There were a lot of bombs and missiles being sent remotely. And so I really began to think about the interface, which is also a really big part of technology. And I've always felt like this is not a very nice way to sit, to be, hunched over a computer. And so I decided to make the interface really, really large. And they're two 14-foot long aluminum knitting needles that are suspended by water weights. And you have to move them in order to trigger an animation. So I like this idea. And those of you who know, like one of the things that technology doesn't like is water. And one of the things that's really difficult to teach a program to do is how to knit and how to swim. Those are things that tend to be done visually or physically. So I like that idea of having this really incredible apparatus. So you knew something was happening behind you, but you didn't know what. In order to get the device is a potentiometer. So every time the wire moved, it clicked a bit in a different image. So I also wanted the weights to be very physical. So you had to be, if you wanted the reward of the image, you couldn't see what was happening behind you. This was at the time the interface board. So this is old. This was handmade by a colleague at the Art Institute. And the whole thing was programmed in Macromedia Director, which doesn't exist anymore. And this is a kind of details of the images. It's simply a swimmer who goes into the distance. And so usually with kind of video game technology, this idea of reward is really important. So I wanted to make it interesting, but not have that kind of narrative. So I'd actually photographed a friend swimming in a pool, and I took it into Photoshop and really painted it because I also wanted to make, at that point, the work in digital media was pretty flat. And so again, it was giving, but also not giving, like seeing what that relationship could be. What could I give that would be interesting, and what could I hold back on? Another later work, which is not interactive but kinetic, is called Symphony for 54 Shoes. And in this piece, I collected 54 pairs of shoes from different secondhand, Renaissance, Value Village. And it was really important for me to have the shoes that had a weight and a history. And so these are all on solenoids, which are basically sensors. When they get a pulse, they pull down and the shoe taps. Each shoe also has a toe and heel tap used for tap dancing. And so I wanted to make something that was a bit, I think, about dysfunctional technology, or maybe tender technology that didn't work. So these shoes kind of move, but they don't really dance. And so that idea of the weight of the shoe is a very different kind of. Has been shown a number of times, and that one is version 3. Now, of course, it's plug and play. It's done with just like the Arduino. You put them in, but the first ones, oh my God, it was like shells of all the cables hanging. It's such a nightmare. And so it's really interesting. That's what I like about media technology too. Is like it's really different. You don't really have an original. Like you have a version. So how that fits into the art world, like where the idea of the original is so sacrosanct, and the author. And so this is version 4. So it's kind of like and it's also really important for me, as in this piece, Pinocchio's dilemma is to make the technology visible. So you really can see, if you just looked under the table, you can see how it works. This one is called Pinocchio's Dilemma, and I was very interested in, well, in lying, telling stories, and the difference or not difference between them. And the Canadian writer Northrop Frye always said that poets are licensed liars. And I think that's very true for artists. And I think what we don't say, or what we do say, tells often is equally, the truth is equal to the lie in some ways in terms of the actual truth. So I was thinking of these tongues, and I took a class in medieval art history when I was here at York, and there were some incredible things. Like there's one thing from the Bible about tongues that turn on, that flame and appear above bushes. Well, that image, I was like, I've got to do this. So, and then I also think of the story of Cassandra, the Greek myth, who wanted so badly to be given the gift of prophecy, but Apollo refused her because she rejected his advances. So when she refused him, he turned into a wolf surrounded by mice and spat on her tongue. And in that moment, she was given the prophecy, but would never be believed. And so she was, of course, the one who, um, predicted the fall of Troy. No one believed her. And she was also became unfairly an iconic kind of figure for female hysteria. So obsessions with tongues, but I also want them tongues to be beautiful tongues, like not. So they're, these are crazy. They're cast in resin. They have a little, what is it called? A zip tie inside that's attached through the tube onto a motor, and they beautiful tongues, lying or telling the truth. And on the opposite wall, there's a nose. Well, it's a symbolic nose. This is the only piece I've had that people have licked. And so then this on the other side is this rod that comes out, sort of a nose telling. Of course, it's sure. The other thing that I think is really important for me and always has been is the notion of community. And I think that's something that maybe is a bit um, maybe undervalued at this moment. And so when I first moved to Montreal in 1998, I was looking for a place to live, and I met a developer, and he showed me this building that it was on the corner of Saint Denis and Duluth, which is a pretty nice neighborhood. And he was going to be turning it into condos, and it had been a rooming house. And so he offered me he said, why don't you paint a mural in the courtyard? And I said, I can do it, but you won't like it. So I said, will you give me the building before you tear it down? And surprisingly, he said yes. And so I was giving the building. We had 1 week, and Barbara was in this show. And it was an incredible spirit of community. People just, there was no money. Also, this was really before it was really easy. It was just word of mouth. And it was students, grad students, professional artists. There was no curating, everyone who wanted to be in it. There were 48 rooms and 62 artists participated, and it was shown for 48 hours. And we had over 2,000 people see it in those 48 hours.
Oh, that's
I
amazing.
also learned a lot about how the idea of the threshold, because it was a rooming house, because every room was small, there was a door. People came, they came off the street. It managed to get a lot of press, but people came and they could open it up. If they didn't like it, they could close. So a lot of the rooms were like, there was video. It was not, there was some painting, but it was actually really pretty interesting, challenging work. Not to say that painting isn't interesting, it is. But it was non-conventional in the form. And so it also, I didn't give it a theme, which some people said, oh, I didn't give it a theme, but I thought this building had so much history and memory of lives that it was like, no, it's all there. And so this was a piece by Lorraine Artis where she took a kind of domestic fabric and she completely wrapped the room as a kind of almost an act of care. And this work by, I can't believe I'm going to forget his name, Shelley Lowe, and it will come. They went to the dollar store and they just bought all kinds of things and built this extravagant chandelier. What's on the floor are the mattresses, which were pretty gross. But when you went in this room, everything was uneven. It was this exuberance. And I thought that was kind of lovely. Like, we can't always presume that because someone is in a state where it's not ideal, that they don't have their own happiness and joy. Giselle Amatea, this is a room that had quite a serious fire, and she poked holes in it and burnt around them a little more and put some little amplifiers or speakers you get from greeting cards, and they all had Somewhere Over the Rainbow playing in that very tinny. Oh, Callie Bardsell was a student at the time, and she was really interested in using where the fire extinguishers were, and instead of doing a memento mori. So for the 2 days, every day, she cast bouquets of flowers into freezers, put them in, and then let them drip for the end of the day. And that was really touching work. This one was my work, and it was called what was it called? As blue as, oh my God, this is terrible. Waves as tall as a house, because my parents were immigrants and they came over on a boat. And so the big story was that there were waves as tall as a house. And I was thinking, so there's a little mechanized boat that goes back and forth. It's from a Kinder Egg. Because I also felt rooming houses are little places of kind of, they're not really of the past or of the future. They're always navigating. They're certainly not of the present. People tend to be dreaming behind or of something better or hoping for something more. When I was at Concordia, I was lucky enough to be part of Hexagram, which was a media research. It was some of the founding days. So I had a studio there, and I was told I had to give it a name, and I was told I had to give it a lab. I had to be a lab, and I couldn't be a studio. So I said, okay, I'll be an institute. I'm going to be the Institute of Everyday Life. And so then we decided, well, we're going to be really institutional and get lab coats, and we all decorated our own. And it was really like nobody twigged or cared. It was sort of great. And I love how you can be kind of site specific in an institution in many different ways. We also, for many years, I took graduate students to Cuba to a festival called the Romerias de Mayo to experiment. And that was quite a wonderful experience where they had exhibitions. We worked with students there. And then one year I took the team I had. And and I don't work with assistants right now anymore, which is kind of a pity because I love the camaraderie of it. I love the going back and forth, and also the criticism. Like I had a couple that were like, "Oh, that doesn't work," and you kind of need that too. You really need that. But anyway, so that, and I feel in many ways that art is kind of a social activity. I don't think it's only, and also, of course, doing the work I've done, and on the website, I have the thank yous that go to the many people I've worked with, and I really like that about media art, that it's now also part of that tradition to acknowledge, a programmer or someone who's built something. Also, when I was at Concordia, I worked on 2 lecture series, Defiant Imagination, and started the Conversations in Contemporary Art lecture series, which is still continuing today. And I think that is part of community. I enjoyed doing it. The other thing that is really, this is my hobby, is to draw on Post-it notes. I have thousands of them. Whenever I go anywhere, I draw on them. So this is like something that I can always do. But play and experimentation, just, like trying out all the different things, figuring out how things are going to work, all the different kind of casting things to make things work, doing movement tests. And I think maybe, the speed at which artists are asked to work now and to produce, that there's something really, it's really important to remember the kind of experimentation and the kind of joy that happens when you play, and also the discoveries that happen. This is a piece that really didn't work. It was stones. I wanted them to be stones. There's little sound speakers or sound recordings in there, and there's transducers. So you were supposed to hold them up and you could hear the sounds. With a transducer, you don't use the outer ear, you use the inner ear, and it goes through. So you can put the transducer anywhere on a bone and you'll get it. So these were stories of heart transplant recipients. And so I wanted this intimate connection. But so I picked up stones, I 3D cast them. Then we found this thing to work. But then, of course, you can't show them because they have to be charged and someone might walk off with them. So it was like, oh, well. So, there's things that are just like lost, but that's okay. I mean, I don't think it's a loss. I still like the idea of it. This was another version of it, and this was from Hybrid Bodies, A Part of Me. And that was a pretty wonderful experience that I had working here in Toronto at the Peter Monk Cardiac Center with Chief Cardiologist Heather Ross and an interdisciplinary team of doctors, nurses, philosophers, and other artists. And we were granted access to video interviews of heart transplant recipients, because the medical part of a transplant is now understood. It's almost a routine surgery, but what hadn't been looked at, this was started in, oh my God, when did it start? 2010, long time ago. And no, more earlier than that. It was a project that went on for 14 years, off and on. It was something I did in parallel with other things, but that kind of emotional or embodied experience of heart transplant hadn't been understood. So patients were getting all these mixed messages like, it's a gift, be grateful. And it's like this idea of it's a pump, it's just a pump, it's a mechanism going. So for this piece, I took some of the stories, and then
I'm great. I'm feeling great. Really great. But I'm great. I'm great. They see me as normal. Like a normal person. I am better than before. But pain is pain. I have dreams. I am somewhere and I can't get out. In my dream, I am invisible to others. Colors are so bright. It was not part of me at the beginning. Now it feels like a part of me.
And so that was a very, I'm missing a couple here. Wait. That was a, a really meaningful project to be involved in, because it was also very difficult to not be considered a part of like illustrating the procedure, but trying to get experiences. I also did another, I don't think I have it here with me, is with two dancers. And that was quite wonderful. I think I must have left it out here, but that was because in transplant, there's always the dyad. There's the healthy heart, the unhealthy heart, the body that needs the heart, but the body that also rejects it. Transplant patients have to be on immunoreceptor drugs for their whole life. The idea of the donor, the recipient. And so I worked with two dancers. That was really fortunate at that point that I was at Concordia. I could get a dance studio. One of the dancers was our niece and her friend, and and I really decided to work in a very different way, partly because I wanted to take a bit of a risk with my work, but I also wanted to work in a way that was not illustrative, that was really about the body and using the body.
I'm great.
The other thing I've also done is I've been a writer, not a fiction writer, and that has always been something important part of what I do. Material Matters, the Art and Culture of Contemporary Textiles was a book I did with Ruth Schuing, and it was a time in the 90s when textiles were very much seen as craft, and yet there was a lot of really interesting work being done, but it wasn't being written about. And so we collected a lot of essays, and that might come out again this year from YYZ in its third edition. We're still working on that. Entangled Bodies was really art, identity, and intercorporeality. That was edited by Tamar Al-Sheikh, who's here, and who is also part of the Hybrid Bodies. And then also things like cultural robots. And so that has been a way for me to do things that that I felt that was the right way to do, to talk about. And just a little more work. The work that's in the gallery on site is called Pelt Bestiary. And when I was making it, it was the work this is actually the image from the show that Jane and Steve and I were in Sao Paulo. When I started to think of it, I was really thinking that technology was naked, that it had lost its pelt, its fur. And so I wanted to make a covering for technology and give it back its origin stories. And so I found this black neoprene that I tufted that looked very animal-like, but was also very synthetic, very artificial. And then also made these sculptures, these beasts, that have very different kind of characteristics. This one, which is in the show, has a very undulating kind of motion. Some of them look like they're breathing. Some are interactive and they get maybe annoyed when you come by. Of course, I'm projecting that. These works too. Activity was set. Press a button, yay! Like, how much could I get? How little could I get? Right? What would still attract to this one didn't move, but actually did, because there was ventilation in the room. There was other. There was always that play on. I also did portraits of them. I made them. I did portraits. I liked the idea of the beasts looking at themselves while they were looking at them. And so that kind of relationship between human, animal, and machine life. Also, obviously, rethink the hierarchy. For me? Oh yeah, I guess I do have hybrid bodies. This is a little bit this is the team at the Monk Center. And I'll just show you maybe I will, a little bit of the video. Yeah, it was called The Gift, because that was a really complicated part of the gift. those sort of the healthy heart, the unhealthy heart, the fear once you've had a transplant of interaction, of touching anything because your immune system is so compromised. I didn't want one dancer to be the donor and one to be the recipient. It was always sort of changing. This way, it's a dying heart. Apparently, a dying heart does stop, cardiologist said. I mean, or the movement is. The next work is from 2017 and it's called The Angry Machine. And I am still very interested in emotional machines. And it's something that idea of, again, like attributing tender to technology, gentle. In this one, it was 2017, which there's so much more to be angry now about then. So in some ways, so it's this cage. And, but I was thinking like at that point too, how anger is anger has power in it because it's not like rage. Like anger can go under the surface. It can be actually quite too. Protect you from the machine. This very elaborate machine, and eventually it sends out this red, but not in any terribly great force. It's apparatus that it was basically where you take a ball and you put it in a spot, and if you do a rhyme, but then if you this could really hurt yourself. And so there was something about I wanted something that would be really angry and would have a kind of sense of anger. This was a piece that I did during COVID, and that was a really interesting piece. It's called Embrace. It was that period, which now feels so long ago, but where touch was impossible. And so I kind of wanted to make a piece where that could be touch, that would give a sense of touch without physical touch. So it's a two-part piece. This is the floor work. There's speakers that are made out of copper and conductive wire, embroidered in a spiral. There's a magnet underneath. Each one has, and when of course the sound comes through it, they vibrate. So this is the wall piece, which has also speakers, and they kind of do a call and response. The one thing that was very unfortunate about this piece, all the dots on the museum are for distancing. The sound came from, oh my God, what's it called, Wojciech? The pentatonic glockenspiel, right? And so I recorded them with the metal or with the rubber and the wooden tap. And it has this, it's a really interesting little instrument because it makes all sound. Everything sounds good on it. And so I really wanted this field of sound and also this vibration. So it's to be really a kind of shimmer when you were there. So a very experiential piece. Now so this is how it's hooked up to the amplifier and the Raspberry Pi. And this was a machine, because it's a Jima machine, an industrial embroidery machine that I used to make the speakers. And that was, that was a really interesting, very practical use of technology. The only unfortunate thing about this was in Kansas, and it was during COVID. I couldn't go, and they didn't take any video. And this is a piece, like I have two photos and they're not even that great, you know, and so it's like, and of course I couldn't set it up before I left because it was too big. So it's just like, anyway, this was the last piece, the large piece that I worked on, and it was last year. In the last couple of years, I worked in Matanzas, Cuba, and I've had a long relationship with Cuba, and Cuba now it's in a terrible state. It's just heartbreaking. But this gallery is in Matanzas. I'd met the owner of it. He has a metal shop, an art studio, a gallery. He trains artists. This is one of his sculptures out front, and he invited me to make a work there. And it was, and we went there over 2 years, once a year. And this is the atelier, the metal studio, and it was a really fabulous, an amazing experience. I kind of wish every Canadian art studio could make a work in a country that has less resources, because you appreciate what it is. Nothing could be bought, like everything had to be founder made. And that was a really interesting experience for me too, to just, and it changes. You can't have everything you want. So the piece is called Beauty and the Beast. It's a public sculpture, Beauty in the Beast. And I was thinking very much of an Angela Carter story. So this is how the rebar was bent, like no bending machine, just this was the axle, which was came from a truck part that was used to make the motion of this giant skirt. And then cutting up found metal, scrap metal to make that, using corrugated metal to make this giant skirt. And then making ceramic legs. And there was this is carrying the piece to its final, like this is, when I was thinking about this, there's a beautiful Angela Carter story where a book where she retells a lot of fairy tales. And in Beauty and the Beast, at the ending, when Beauty returns to Beast, it's a very different ending, because when Beauty returns to the Beast in the Angela Carter retelling, she loses her jewels, her robes, and she starts to become covered with a soft pelt. And so in a way, that story is about kind of an awakening sexuality, which is very different for the kind of typical fairy tale heroine. And so this Beauty and the Beast, so one of the legs is a goat leg, and the other one is a dancer's leg. The large skirt also has just window screen used as a kind of ruffle. These were the people we worked with, which were amazing. The curator, Helga Montalban, is on the right. It's handy too, because it's on a walk and now it can shelter people from the sun. I guess that's, I don't have a full picture of it again. That's terrible. I'm so bad at once the work is there. But that was kind of a wonderful experience. I was also the first woman to have a piece on the Malecon. And there were we worked with a lot of students from the nearby college for that. So that's it. Thank you so much for. Happy to answer questions if you have any.
Are there questions? And maybe, I know that we were going to turn on some lights, maybe it's fine, but that was great, Ingrid. Thank you very much. And I know Dave is.
Yeah, well, just one comment and then a question. Actually, hybrid bodies, I never told you this, but it was really powerful, I found. And you showed it to me when it was in the hexagram black box, and
Right.
the way the dancers, and she had these bone conductive microphones, it was just such a powerful piece. And I loved it, and it made me actually tear up just seeing it again. So thank you for that work. You didn't show Portable Sublime, which is something I show
know.
my students often.
It's my favorite, one of my favorite pieces.
such a-
There just wasn't time. And
No.
that one came out of 48 hours, because what the Portable Sublime is all these old suitcases, and in them they each have an event. And I realized from the 48 hours, when you open a door, people were so,
That's my question. You're
Yeah.
answering my question.
oh,
before I-
okay, well, ask your question.
Well, no, that's it. It was basically, did it come from that?
It
'Cause to me,
absolutely
it's
came from
100%
that.
connected.
And so
Yeah.
I really feel like that way of how do you get people to open a work? And that's a very that was also, my parents were immigrants. And also, this is such a terrible time now in terms of people who are exiles and refugees. And so this idea, though, that wherever you go, you could take the sublime with you, that it didn't have to be, that you could take something. And so one of them, it's a giant rocks. Another one is a working waterfall. So it's kind of it's one of my favorite works, but I'm old, I have a lot of work. But also it's again that kind of relationship between material technology and also kind of demystifying technology too a little bit.
That's great.
Yeah.
Certainly.
So you might want to answer or not. Like I'm very curious because every single time you were doing a work and I said, oh, there is no documentation for this. Oh, I could not. I only had a couple of pictures. Oh, I forgot the video. And it sounds to me that because of the type of work that you're doing and you're dealing so much with material technologies and every single work is different, even if you're doing different versions of the same. How important is documentation in your work? Is it kind of ruining? Or is it absolutely necessary?
That's absolutely necessary. And my partner, Wojtek, since he's been in my life, my documentation has gotten really good. And I don't, I can't believe when I did the knit one swim two piece, we didn't video it. We're so exhausted. By the time it was up for 6 weeks in the city I lived in. So I think I do have something's not quite, I might have been dropped on my head at birth or something, but I do think most of it for me is getting it up and then wanting people to see it, but then I want to do something else. But yeah, there is something about the documentation. Also, some works are just really, really hard to document. But the one in Kansas was particularly disappointing because yeah.
Yeah, that is also something that so it seems so I've interacted with some of your works and they are so interactive and I see different people interacting with them and every single person has a very personal relationship with them and so like that's partly that partly was also my follow-up question because I asked you about documentation but then the experience, the individual experience is always different. So it becomes very complicated to do documentation.
And I think it really, for me, it's really important, the experience. And even how I set up a lot of the shows, this idea of walking through them, with that there is this sense of time, there is kind of maybe not a full narrative, but yeah, the experience is important. And sometimes why couldn't I have been a painter? Painting's really hard though. I mean, I tried. I started out as a painter like everyone of my generation, printmaker, but it's nothing is easy in the arts, I think. Basically, whatever path you take, there's sort of complications. But for me, yes, because the experience is so important, it means there's always something that can't be documented. So it's a really interesting point. And so.
That's great. Are there other questions?
Yeah, I'll have four one. I'll have as I speak, but I'm often the one person in the room who's least likely to be drawn to something interactive, probably more so in this gathering. So I mean, I usually shy away from interactive work because either it's telling me what to do or I feel I have to know to do it properly. And I've always felt experiencing your work. Like I haven't thought about it precisely as I encountered it, but I've always felt really comfortable and drawn in and not invited because it sounds too definite, but I haven't had a problem interacting or witnessing or taking in your work. So when you do your work, how do you think? It seems like you're thinking about the audience and you're thinking how will they come to it?
I do. And I think, when I first graduated college, I worked at the Shaw Festival as a costume painter. And so for 2 summers, I was just listening to music, sound, theater, sets, language, this sort of really interdisciplinary way of working. And I think it kind of informed a little bit that later work. I think very much about Not so much what they think, what I want them to believe, what I want them to get, but part of my interest always, both in the writing and the work, was always about kind of demystifying technology, about making it like, here it is. Why don't you try it too? And the kind of, I don't know, in some artists' use of technology, there is sort of an authoritarian, like, or like, look how brilliant I am, look how spectacular. So there is a bit of an anti-spectac aspect, but yeah, I do. And I also test it. Like, I have a lot of people come in uh, and play with it and look at it. And I have less people now around me that are quite as honest as when I had all those studio assistants, but which is kind of, yeah, yeah. So, but no, it's really, thank you for saying that. That is something really important to me. I don't want to control the interpretation. Yeah. And I think the politics that are in the work are there quite deeply, but I think they're not, it's not overt, uh, like consciously so.
You don't really want to control the interaction either.
No, no, but I think people do tend to interact. I haven't had people who not, and also, well, what I did when I first showed the knitting needles, I did put photos up of people using them, because that was like 94 and 95. So there wasn't that much interactive work. So I did that. So it was kind of like an invitation. This is what you're supposed to do. And so actually yeah. And I think that was sort of important at that time too.
But there's just a sense of joy, I think, with the works that you make, like the large knitting needles, like, come on, everybody's gonna wanna sort of work with them, or like the portable sublime, it's just so aesthetic. And it's funny because you talk about printmaking and you talk about painting and textiles, but I consider you a sculptor.
Yeah, I think I'm a sculptor, really, sure. Yeah.
I mean, you've got an incredible sense of form and object and materiality, and
Yeah,
there's.
well, I would identify as a sculptor primarily, but the influences come from
The different.
everywhere, yeah.
for sure.
But I think that idea of joy is so important. And a little while back, I was kind of losing it in my work, and that's not good, because then, why are you doing it? And so I think that's really important to go back to that point of joy. And for some reason, we have so many little children in our life right now. We have 7. I do a lot of art with them, and it's fun. It's such a reminder of how to approach things. They know what they're doing, and they know what they're doing. Don't tell them, just give them the tools. And I think that idea of joy is really important. And I think right now, because it's such a difficult time, I think it's really important for artists to keep making things and be active. And I think there is a kind of agency in that, particularly in difficult times, not that it's going to change the world, but it's kind of a stance. And so I think that's important. And also, I think joy is really important. And so I'm getting back to finding it again in the work. Yeah.
Asking about the material. Like, how do you choose your materials? Is it in accordance to your, like, the concept or ability, or how you that you want to interact with it, or like how do you choose?
It's usually because of the project I have in mind. And so, well, I have an obsession with shoes, which I think a lot of women do. And I realized I found some drawings from my undergrad days at York, and they're these giant shoes that look like weapons. So it's like, I guess this does go back. No, I think I kind of like, so there's a lot of material exploration, like for the tongues, how do I make those things? So I'm not, in that way, it's not, I guess where my continuity is sort of in how I produce things. Like, I have to usually do a lot of research, talk to a lot of people, learn things. But yeah. And I seem to love most materials, except, yeah, no, I can't.
Yeah, because you have a variety.
Yeah, yeah.
It was great to see the piece from the 1990s engaging with the early days of the internet. I was thinking about all of the set the time that's passed and the way technology is changing rapidly, the way we're sort of integrating it. Anyway, I kind of just have this general question about, reflecting back, I mean, do you have thoughts about how our relationship to those technologies changed in terms of creation and making, or,
I think so. I mean, it's far more ubiquitous. I mean, a lot of my pieces are redundant now, like the Nomad Web. I did another piece, Fault Lines, which exchanged like seismic information from Montreal to LA through modems. Like now this is easy, like this is not like, this is just, but I actually think because it is so ubiquitous, it's still really interesting to be part of it. And for artists to be part of the questions. And now, of course, we're in this period of AI. Um, and, it's still this myth that technology isn't material. Like there's all the submarine light cables, there's all the satellites, like there's all the people who made this under horrific conditions. So I think there's still a lot of ways for artists also to use technology to show people that it can be used for different purposes and can make other things with them what we're given. But yeah, it is different. And of course, most people it's almost like a prosthetic. Even my phone is a little bit like that for me. It's terrible. Like how? Like where is it, Yeah, I think it was easier. Like I couldn't believe what we could do with the internet in the early days. Yeah, that was like crazy. You could just go into it. Like now there's so many more walls.
it's interesting to sort of think about how in those early days, in part, it was just about finding out what we could do.
Yeah.
And then I think we moved to a phase where we began to be thinking about what kind of aesthetic languages might we start to develop around these technologies. And of course, there was a moment when you were talking about interacting with the bestiary piece,
Yeah.
the pellets, and it made me think of early video. And when artists were starting to work with video and the way in which they were sort of experimenting, exploring, challenging the medium. And in
Yeah.
some ways, I still think we're in that phase of experimenting, exploring, and challenging our relationship to technology.
Yeah, I think so. I hope so.
We're all doing in different ways.
Well, I think it's always important to question something when it's given to you as a fait accompli. Like this is how you use it. This is what it's used for. But it's of course, I don't know. There's so many more sort of firewalls and everything. So and things.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know. I think artists are really innovative and very curious, and I think that gives me hope.
Absolutely. Other questions or thoughts? Comments?
I have a question. Your career is admirable and it's just really bold. Like you went for the things that you envisioned that you wanted to do, and I just had to highlight that. And what's really difficult about the path you've chosen is that it's not one. As like Jane mentioned, she sees you as a sculptor. You mentioned yourself as a painter. That you identify.
I don't identify as painter. No, I studied it.
Okay, sorry. Sorry.
Oh.
I'm just thinking, like, through your career, you wore many different hats. Someone can tell you're a sound artist. Someone can tell you're an installation artist. Someone a sculptor. Someone a media artist. How do you feel about? How did you cope with it? Because, like, it's really right.
Well, it's a
not
really good
easy.
question because the art world, and especially now, it's really about the artist, the signature, the object, and having a look. And if you see photos of me from we just did a big party for my mom's birthday, and I have a different hairstyle and color and it's kind of good to have a Yoko Ono, Joseph Beuys look as an artist. And it's kind of good to do the same thing. Couldn't do it. And also I think when I was coming through, there were a lot of artist-run centers. It was pretty experimental. Like in Montreal, rents were cheap. All of us lived in the same neighborhood. It things were less formalized. There wasn't such a big commercial scene. So probably I was trained a bit more with an idealistic view about the role of art and culture and what it could be and what it should be. And so I haven't got a practical bone in my body. So I just feel very fortunate that I was able to follow the path I have and had a career, because I didn't do what one is supposed to do, which is to get a style but I couldn't have done it any other way. But it is, I am known for different things, and it does make it somewhat difficult, but I am a Gemini. So I figure I'm entitled to at least two, maybe even four identities. So I think some of being an artist is like you just have to accept who you are. I mean, I moved a lot and I kept thinking a new person was going to follow me around, the new me, and same old person kept coming along. So, at some point it's like, well, you are who you are. And it's kind of good to get to know that person and not fight it.
Yeah. We need to, sometimes like for our own sanity, we need to grasp on an idea of ourselves. So it just feels easier, but when you don't, it's just like, that's when I guess innovation comes in.
Well, I feel lucky I've been able to follow my curiosity, and I've met so many interesting people, but then I've never been like a complete studio artist where I'm alone in my studio, and I have a good friend who is, and it's remarkable the work she does. It's phenomenal, but it's very different. I mean, I've always wanted to be in the world, working with geologists, working with programmers, working with seismologists. So, and I feel very fortunate I've been able to follow that path. And I just asking a lot of questions, and I think people are much more open to art than we realize, when it's not maybe when it's through a person-to-person contact. So. Thank you so much. Great questions, all of you. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you can come to the show on Wednesday.
It's opening.
5 o'clock at On-Site Gallery on Richmond Street,
Yeah.
between Duncan and, yeah, they're just fabulous to work with. It's been, and Dion Naldi is going to be the show. It's going to be a really interesting show. Pardon me? Yeah, yeah. So
Gonna be here.
I don't know. So, but yeah, and many others whose name I've forgotten because they're not in front of me. So, but yeah.
So that's great.
Great.
Well, thank you very much, Ingrid.
Oh, pleasure to be here.
Fellow Gemini.
Oh, yes.